whatever you have to say is not of value to them?
First, I appreciate and thank you for having me on this broadcast. It is, maybe I start by saying that not everyone is saying what you read out. There are others who are saying other things. But that is still okay, because it is the right of the people of Kenya to express themselves on what they think about their leaders, especially political leaders. And therefore, mine is to confirm that because I've been in public life for a while, in various capacities, I have endeavored to do my best to my country, and I have no regret for anything. Maybe lessons learned, which is a common human thing, that perhaps there are things I've picked along the way. But in terms of my public duty and commitment to our national interest, I have been extremely clear on what is expected of me in the various roles that I have played in this country.
As Interior CS, where Kenyans feel that you oversaw massive brutality on Kenyans who are expressing themselves when they felt that their leaders were not representing them in the way that they should, do you take personal responsibility for the murder of 60 people, according to the KNCHR?
Well, the violent protest that took place early this year, and even earlier on in 2023, unfortunately led to loss of lives. Some of those lives were lost in various ways, including through police action. I have no reason to take responsibility for anything, because the space of violence and encounter with law enforcement is a space which is defined by law. And the role of the Minister for Interior is defined in the Constitution, Article 245, on what that role is. That role includes providing policy guidance to the organs of internal security. The role of police operations are protected through the mandate of independent command of the Inspector General, and therefore police operations, especially in engaging protesters or people who are seen as breaching the peace, is the province for the independent command of the National Inspector General of the National Police Service. As far as I'm concerned, the 2 years I have been the country's Interior Minister, every single day of them, when I woke up to do my work, to make sure that the security organs of our country that protect our country from threat. I woke up to do my work, to make sure that the security organs of our country that protect our country from threats, security threats, perform their work. And should they require any policy guidance, that guidance is provided. And that's all what I can say for now.
So you're saying tonight that you have no say whatsoever when the police misbehave?
The Interior Minister has no role in police operations, according to Article 245.
So you have no say whatsoever when they go wrong? As a professor of law?
I have a say, and I said it. And the say is this, that police officers are allowed to use force, including lethal force, in exceptional circumstances. Should any officer violate the strict parameters of those circumstances, they are accountable under the law. And we say it many times, not once, not even in the context of the protest alone. but also in the context of the fight against terror and the fight against banditry and other organized crime. That any police officer who uses their firearm lawfully within the Constitution, including lethal force, has legal protection. But
So
any of them who exceeds the parameters of the Constitution is on their own, and the organs of accountability is not the Interior Minister. It is the agencies such as IPOA and the DPP and the rest.
So who shot at David Chege at the precincts of Parliament and Erickson Chalo Mutisia? These two young men were not armed. Would you say that use of live ammunition was reasonable?
I think the matter of the violence that occurred in Parliament and the unfortunate loss of life is a matter that which is actively being investigated by IPOA and other agencies. So it will be preemptive for me to tell you who shot the two Kenyans who unfortunately, according to the records, lost their lives in that context.
So how far are the investigations? You're the DP now. You may have moved on to a different role, but it's definitely senior to...
I'm aware that there are two ways of conducting investigations. One is through the Internal Affairs Unit of the police. But our policy in the last 2 years, while we were in that docket, we discouraged the Internal Affairs Unit of the police from being the ones to investigate their colleagues, because it raised. So we encourage the Independent Police Oversight Authority to be the one to do the investigations. The report I had when I left the ministry is that they had made some good progress. They reported to me they had some 6 files which are ready from the context of the riots and the violence around that time. But there has been a transition in the leadership of IPOA right now. A new commission has just been put in place, and the work of IPOA is led by commissioners. It's not led by the Secretariat. So the delay in the last 2-3 months could be associated to the leadership transition by IPOA.
Ashley and George, you have follow-ups. Ashley?
All right, Your Excellency, you have made a name for yourself as a defender of human rights. Are you proud about the events that occurred in June this year? I mean, this led to deaths of young, innocent Kenyans. Where does this sit as, to you, the professor of human rights, not as the deputy president, but as the professor of human rights?
Any Kenyan, not to mention a professor of law, who would be proud by what happened in our country, June, July, from whatever angle, would be inappropriately doing so. Because those events were extremely painful to the country. They were unnecessary, if I may say so, because there is a way of processing democratic encounters, and there's a way in which the balances between the protection of public safety and the expression of individual rights and freedoms must help us navigate peaceful and orderly society. So to answer your question, I wouldn't be proud at all.
Mr. Deputy President, then what did you have to say to families who are still looking for their loved ones? For instance, on X, we were tagged and someone said, I always communicate with Peter Masharia's mom. Imagine she wakes up every day to go to the mortuary. Peter Masharia went missing on the 25th of June. Tonight, what do you tell those families that are still looking for their loved ones?
To the families who lost their loved ones or whose loved ones are still missing, I would say that it's unfortunate that this country went through what it went through in June, July. I hope that our country has learned the lessons and we will not get there again, because losing a loved one, having a loved one missing for months, almost half a year, even for a day, is extremely painful. And therefore, as I said when I responded to this matter earlier on, maybe not on this forum, it is very unfortunate, and we, including myself, regret that our country went that direction and hope that we will not get there again.
Yet when they look at you, Professor, they say you are the face of, disappearances, abductions, deaths and murders on young people in this country. Do you feel that you're struggling to shake off that tag?
Not at all,
Okay.
because it is not true. So I don't struggle at all.
So then,
Your Excellency, the families that were bereaved pleaded with the government of the day to help them with burial expenses. Did that happen? How much was spent? And there was a committal to compensate families that lost their beloved ones. What's the status of that, Deputy President?
To the best of my knowledge, a number of families were given modest ex gratia support on a request basis and on a basis of confidentiality, because what the state does in a situation like that, when there is distress in the country, citizens are facing distress, we go out of our way for ways of supporting. But normally that support is support which, first of all, is not budgeted for, so we have to look for ways of, within the security budget, absorbing some of those costs. And if I recall well, a number of families were supported on an ex gratia basis. The question of compensation is a little more complex and will require guidance, because no law would allow expenditure on compensation for events similar to what we had. I am aware, even in more extreme cases like terrorist-related deaths and injury, it is anticipated that victims of terrorist crimes and other violent acts would be compensated. And I think when we left the ministry, we were trying to develop regulations on the operationalization of Section 49 of the Prevention of Terrorism Act. And I think that can form a basis of thinking of how else or in which other circumstances perhaps extreme cases of loss and injury could be compensated. So that's a discussion we are having, and I am more than willing to follow up. Even in my new role, nothing prevents me from following up and ensuring that in justifiable cases which are defined by law, where injury or loss happens and the law allows, then compensation can ensue.
So this evening you're telling Kenyans that the bereaved families will have to wait longer until the law is developed. And I'm not actually asking for specific families. These are public resources for purposes of accountability. Once again, how much was spent to settle the burial expenses?
I wouldn't know, because it's not, there is no vote called burial expenses. There's no vote like that. So this is ex gratia support, not just for these cases, many other cases every day that the state deals with are done ex gratia within the security operations budget, and therefore it's not possible to pinpoint this amount was used for burial because of the lack of a specific vote line.
On the time frame for compensation?
What about?
What time can they wait? For how long can the law be developed?
I am not sure, but we will do our best to make sure that cases where we form consensus, national consensus that require compensation are onboarded, because even in the extreme and glaring cases of terrorism, I've told you, it has taken, I think now, quite a number of years since we enacted the Prevention of Terrorism Act to operationalize that section. So I'm hoping perhaps within the year, within the coming year, we can work with the new leadership in that ministry and other stakeholders in the normal way government works and process perhaps regulations on the operationalization of some of these issues. As to whether that can be expanded beyond terrorism-related incidents, that is a discussion again which we can open up to stakeholder input and have it dealt with.
It's clear, Mr. Deputy President, that the tag behind you, and my colleague Mashima Kapombe mentioned it when we mentioned that we were having this interview, is not a very rosy one. And one person in particular called you the butcher of Tharaka. I have two important questions I'd like to understand. Because President William Ruto addressed the nation on the night of June 25th when protesters breached Parliament. He told the nation that that was a treasonous act perpetrated by crooks and criminals. Do you believe that the young people killed by police during the protest were crooks and criminals and not young people trying to advocate for their rights?
The protests of June started as legitimate protests by peaceful Kenyans who were expressing their rights and opinions on certain issues that they felt that needed to be handled by government differently. In the course of those protests, criminal elements infiltrated those protests. And it became very difficult. On the one hand, you have protesters whose interest is just expressing themselves within the Constitution. But within their midst, there are people killing people, hurting people, looting property. And that's how Parliament was breached, because protesting does not include breaching in Parliament, which is a restricted access facility. And that day, we came very short of the burning down of Parliament. And in the process, the chambers of the Chief Justice were also vandalized by protesters, broke the wall, broke windows and doors, and stole water and other items. So the point is, how do we balance going forward? They need to protect the right to protest, but at the same time ensure public safety. Other countries have had their occasions, like the Americans had on 6th January 2020. Similar situation. People are unhappy with an election outcome, and they just venture into constitutional institutions and run amok and bring violence. So it is unfortunate we had that mix-up between honest, legitimate protesters and cruel and dangerous criminals who really caused a lot of pain, death, destruction, and almost put down some of our institutions established under the Constitution.
There's been many questions over who gave the shoot-to-kill order. Was there a shoot-to-kill order? And was it a show of culpability for security agencies under your command that warranted the presence of the military, the Kenya Defense Forces, to quell the situation?
There was no shoot-to-kill order. And the Interior Minister does not command the operations of the police. This is spelled out in Article 245 of the Constitution in very clear terms.
If there was
Your Excellency, I want to put this question to you. There is a question of responsibility. When you're being vetted for the second time as the Cabinet Secretary Interior, there was a lot of praise heaped on you for combating banditry in the north of Kenya. And you appeared to acknowledge that. Was the police in the North Rift under different command, so much so that when it comes to the Gen Z protests, you're not the one in charge, but when it comes to the North Rift, you will take the glory?
At no time have I said I've been in charge of the operations on banditry, because the Minister for Interior does not play that role. Have I provided policy leadership to deal with banditry in the last 2 years? The answer is yes, in a very consequential manner, with great humility, because other than advising on the establishment of the Operation Maliza Uhalifu and the gazettement of the disturbed areas, that's the job now of the minister. Those are policy interventions. But I was able to push through in a very difficult financial situation prevailing then in the country, an injection of a significant amount of resources to acquire equipment to assist the police in their operations, which has been the missing link for many years. MRAPs, that is the mine resistance ambush protected vehicles, armored personnel carriers, drones, that is the aerial vehicles, unmanned aerial vehicles, and so many other, including personal protection items. So in a very modest way, I would want to be associated with the tremendous work done by the police, with the support of the military, to dismantle the infrastructure of banditry in the North Rift, because I provided policy support for the acquisition of modern weapons and also providing the legal space for the police to carry out operations, especially in the areas which I classified as disturbed and dangerous, because that is where criminals were always retreating and regrouping. Those areas today are completely free from bandits.
The question here, Your Excellency, is on the question of responsibility. Local NGOs, the United Nations, the US government, the foreign missions have admonished the government of the Republic of Kenya of its human rights record, and particularly the handling of a Gen Z protests. My question to you tonight is, when the Republic of Kenya is being admonished, who takes responsibility?
Well, as I have said, you see the general admonition or viewpoints by various stakeholders on the performance of government on many things, including homeland security, is a legitimate thing. But the question of responsibility arises when one believes that there is something they have done wrong. It doesn't arise when someone's conscience is crystal clear. They have not done anything wrong. From where I sit, the nearly 700 days I served as Kenya's Interior Minister, one, I can account for each of those days what I did for this country, sometimes under great distress and risk, which I knew I'm exposing myself, but because of duty, I had to do it. Some of the places I did, my predecessors never ventured into them. I spent nights in police barracks and military barracks with frontline soldiers, not to command them, but to give them moral support, including on Christmas Day, including on Easter, places like Lamu, where terror attacks were the order of the day, to give them support that the government has not sent these officers there to die. They have sent them there to protect the nation, and as minister, my moral support and the policy guidance I gave, I think, was instrumental in a big way because of the feedback I have received from the officers. So to answer your question, therefore, I see, I am not saying that our homeland security system is perfect. It is work in progress. But responsibility is individual. It's not collective.
I must remind you, Prof, and the viewers that there's a lot of rain here, so we'll have to speak a bit louder so that we can be heard. But as you speak about policy guidelines and taking modest credit for what was done in the North Rift on banditry, are you trying to tell us that you could not give policy guidelines on how police protests or moral support in them ensuring that they adhere to human rights?
We did.
So what happened? What went wrong?
What went wrong is what goes wrong when maybe, the operations, security operations are intense and emotive operations. It's not somewhere where an officer will be told, when you reach there, do this, do the other. So what we have are general policy guidelines. For example, the use of lethal force is reserved when to apply when the life of the officer is at risk.
So was
If a
any,
criminal,
was any
for example,
officer's life in
wants to
danger?
take
Allow me,
down-
Professor Kindiki,
Yes.
was any police officer in danger when David Shege and Enoch Chalo, Erickson Chalo Mutisia only had a flag and they were dancing outside Parliament? What threat did they pose to security officers at
That
Parliament?
is the matter under investigations. If the circumstances you're reading out there is what happened, the officers will be accountable. It's as simple as that.
And how long will that take?
As soon as IPOA completes the investigations and forwards the files to the DPP. Criminal investigations are complex. They involve scientific assembling of evidence. It is not enough to rush suspects to court only for cases to collapse, and it is not uniquely a Kenyan issue. Criminal investigations, especially in a complex endeavor like the situation you're referring them to, take a bit of time, and therefore I'm hopeful that
Why were the police in mask? How complex was that? That we
again,
could not
let
see
me not
who
speak
was
to-
ensuring
I am
security is not
investigator.
breached.
You're just telling me what you think or saw,
But it
which
was
is
on
part
live
of evidence.
TV. It
Which
was
is
on
part
live
of
TV.
evidence.
There are photos of police officers who are masked.
I am
You
not
can't
disputing.
identify them.
I'm not disputing.
But
Just
as
telling
the
you
CS Interior,
that is part of the evidence that is required to hold into account any person who may have been involved in that unfortunate incident you're explaining.
Your Excellency, if you were to move this forward and probably look at why the public is on you. This is what you said on the 12th anniversary of the Supreme Court about a month ago. And you were talking about crucial jurisprudence. You said, I have had to ask myself whether the highest interest is the public interest or there is a higher interest called the national interest, because the public itself could hurt the national interest. Public can be mobilized or mobilize themselves against national interest. First of all, where does this national interest sit in the Constitution? And number two, wasn't this an indirect proposal of a clawback on basic freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution, Your Excellency?
As you answer this, Your Excellency, you did say that lives of protesters need to be protected as you ensure public safety. Was the public unsafe during that period? Why did we get to that point?
When I spoke at the Supreme Court reflection colloquium on public interest and national interest, some erroneously thought I was talking about government interest or even security interest. That's not the case. In fact, after that colloquium, I've had further reflection, because by the grace of God, I'm also a scholar. So I reflect on some of these things, and I have come to the conclusion that within our constitutional framework, we can categorize three forms of interest that could be expressed by members of the public, rather than two, three. One is popular interest. And the question I'm asking myself as a scholar and a student of constitutional law is whether what is popular is in the public interest all the time. I am not sure. I am not sure that what is popular is in the public interest. I don't believe. Sometimes yes, maybe not all the times. But at the Supreme Court colloquium, I also asked, is there a hierarchy of norms in our Constitution such that we have public interest and national interest? And for clarity and avoidance of doubt. National interest is not government interest, and it's not the interest of, it's not security. What I had in mind is, you're aware, our constitution allows the people of Kenya to express themselves in exercise of their sovereignty in two ways. One, through elections. Two, through referenda. And then I asked myself, in fact, it was tailored to the judiciary, and I wanted to ask myself, if the people of Kenya, for example, agree and express themselves in exercise of their sovereignty to change the constitution in a referendum and vote to remove the judicial arm of government, and they decide we don't need the judiciary. People are sovereign. In a referendum, they can actually remove the judiciary. And then I asked myself, since this is an outcome of a referendum, this is in the public interest. But is it in the national interest that really you can have a modern country, a democratic country without a judicial arm of government?
But these are two different scenarios, DP, because this was about taxes that Kenyans felt were unfair, and their leaders
at the
were
Supreme
not
Court,
listening to
I
them.
was not talking about the protest at all. You can look at my statements. I was not talking about protest.
So what do you...
We were reflecting on what the Supreme Court has helped us to understand about our Constitution, and I was inviting the Supreme Court judges to start thinking whether, even as we express our sovereignty, we have what we call bedrock things that we cannot touch. I'll give you another example. If the people of Kenya meet and in a referendum, they overwhelmingly vote, so it is popular, it is in public interest, and they vote to change Article 4.2 of the Constitution that says that Kenya is a democratic multi-party state and creates a monarchy or another form of government that is not democracy. It is in the public interest. It is popular. It's in the popular interest. But is it in the national interest? My answer is that it is not. So within the Constitution, there are things you can change and still not change the DNA of our Constitution. There are others, once you touch them, the DNA of Kenya as we know it changes forever. That's what I was discussing.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that, Your Excellency, because during your vetting, following your reappointment as Interior Cabinet Secretary, you are on record saying that you will specify designated protest areas, potentially undermining the right to peaceful assembly outlined in Article 37 of the Constitution. How would you justify limiting spaces where Kenyans can express their grievances at a time when the government is facing mounting criticism, and why?
That is the practice in all democracies. Show me one democracy where people are free to express themselves anywhere, anyhow, anytime, notwithstanding the rights of other people, including traffic, the right for traffic to flow, and so forth. I have been, before I became minister, I was an academic. And for about 12 years, I traveled to about 100 countries around the world. So I'm very familiar with many democracies. Many of them, including the Hague, where I spent almost 7 years in the International Criminal Court trials. They designate places where you go and express yourself. Every institution actually is mandated. If it's parliament, they designate a place, and then the police gives some routine. They say between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m., a certain group will protest. And they tell the police will be about 500 and so forth. And then you protest there, you hand your petitions, someone comes and receives petitions, then you vacate. Maybe in the evening, another group will come. That's what we might start thinking about. But as long as we think that expression of rights means you venture and frustrate everybody else who is not part of your protest, then we are courting anarchy,
Your Excellency,
and that's not part of democracy.
Understand peaceful protest, because even when, if you go to Chacha, even when you saw the protests regarding the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, they were just roughed off by police. One even wonders, because you even have had leaders who have expressed a fear and concern that actually it's not even Kenyan police. So who are these that appear when Kenyans exercise the democratic freedom of picketing?
The example you have given was regrettable, and government has already addressed itself to that issue. The Principal Secretary for State Department for Internal Security did
Don't you think the precedences are too many?
Not really, I don't think so. And I think with the apology that the State Department gave, I think Kenyans should give government the benefit of doubt. Mm-hmm. Because if the intention was to keep on doing this thing, then an apology was unnecessary. If you know you're going to do it again, you just keep quiet and do it the following day.
Did you realize this only when you became the interior boss? And despite having served in various capacities in the leadership of the Senate, you didn't think of introducing that bill then?
In 2015, I introduced the Homeland Security Bill, which, as leader of majority in the Senate, which was taken up and became part of it, is what became the miscellaneous security laws of 2014. I know some parts of that law were struck out, but 85% of those laws are what has made Kenya
specifically
stable,
on limiting the protesters.
The security laws did not cover the issue of protest, but it covered a wide range of issues that we needed to deal with to make sure that our country is safe. But on the other hand, legislation is work in progress. It doesn't end with one piece of legislation. It happens every day. Democracies which have been in place for 300 years are still making law, even security-related laws. So I did my bit in certain aspects, as the example I've given you, but it is not true that when somebody serves as a member of parliament or Senate, everything that needs to be legislated will be done during that time.
DP, as we wrap this topic up, there's one question that many Kenyans would like to know. In a Citizen TV interview after the protests, you said that infiltrators were linked to elements within government and opposition. And you said we have evidence leading to political operatives from across the political divide. We will prosecute. How far are we with that? How many of those planners or operatives?
Last time I checked, I've been following up after that, and you know that's not too long ago. That was July. After that, as you're aware, the cabinet was dissolved, the entire cabinet. For that period around August, there was no cabinet. July, August, and then September, the vetting. So by the time I went back to the ministry, it was sometimes, I think, almost October. I can't remember the date. And we are following up on that process. As much as I know, a number of people have already recorded statements, and as far as I know, a file was forwarded by the DCI to the DPP, but it was returned to seal certain gaps that had been discovered by the DPP, and therefore that is work in progress. As I said, criminal investigations take long, but I'm sure there will be accountability for everyone who may have either incited violence or taken advantage of the peaceful protest to infiltrate that democratic process.
But you said you have evidence. Why should it take long? Or is it only a preserve of the political class?
That evidence, I have just told you that it was presented to the DPP, and the DPP said it was not enough to convict. You can have evidence which is not enough to convict. I could believe, okay, that the evidence is enough. But the DPP, who has the final say in qualitative and quantitative evidence, is the one who has the police to do more work if we have to sustain prosecution.
So the police didn't do a very good job, that's what you're saying, in the investigation?
This is routine, it happens every day, not just in Kenya, all over the world. The police do their work, and that's why there is that two-tier mechanism. So the DPP looks at it and said, no, we need to fill this using the elements of crime, you need the evidence of this. So we cannot say the police didn't do a good job. It happens every day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We would like to move to the next topic, which is your ascension to power as the Deputy President and the politics around it. And this session will be led by Ashwin Mazuri.
All right, Your Excellency, did you play a role in Rigathi Gachagwa's ouster?
No.
Then are you proud of the process, the impeachment process that many said were flawed that led to your ascension to power as the Deputy President?